All right, so week 6. This week was a lot lighter than I would have liked it to be. I spent most of my time that I spent working on the game working on college homework, so that really sucked up a lot of time. But I am happy with the work that I did get done. So, my primary accomplishment, you could say, this week was finishing the bird avatar, or at least getting it in a playable state. So, all of the artwork that I have from the previous week is now inside an avatar that is playable by the character and can move around the screen. I also went in and added transition artwork, so the little jump animations in between the idle animations for the character. So the bird has flight animations that play in between the different idle states when you're moving around. The other thing I did is when I went in, I added the first ability for that bird avatar, which is the flight ability. So when you press the flight input and then a directional, the bird's going to jump into the air and it won't be able to hit enemies. Enemies won't be able to hit it. And while it does that, it's going to push a dust projectile in the opposite direction that pushes enemies away from it. In addition, while it's in the air, it moves at 1.5 times the speed it moves in the ground, and it moves at 2 times the speed when it first jumps into the air. So it's a high moving control ability. And I really feel like for the bird, it's going to be all about sort of pushing enemies around and then throwing your uh, feather at them. Because the other ability of the bird's going to be some sort of feather related ability. I'm not really sure what yet. Some sort of projectile based thing. Because the main idea is that it's a spacer, right? You sort of push the enemies away from you and then shoot them with your projectile while they're far away. The other really minor thing that I did was start to work on the design of the projectile for the other ability because I know it's going to shoot something, right? And it's probably going to shoot a feather because, it's a bird. So you would think that feathers would be easy to make in a mainly triangular style because they look pretty triangular, right? They're not. Because if you try it, the just a single triangle turns into like a almost kunai looking thing, and that's not what you want. You want it to look like a feather. You can't even like attach smaller triangles to larger triangle because then it just looks like a weird spiky thing, and it doesn't look okay at all. After a lot of iterations in design and sort of fiddling around with it, I actually managed to settle on a design that I liked. You basically use a series of triangles to build the spine of the feather, and then I'm going to animate that to have sort of floofs to it when you shoot the feather. But that's not in existence yet. That's only a design feature, but I'm pretty happy with it. As for where I plan to go with the bird from here, I need to do playtesting. That's a really big thing that I need to do with it because I need to make sure that the abilities that I'm in are actually fun. The other thing is that the flight ability, because it was so powerful, right? There's no other ability in the game that moves you as fast. I mean, admittedly, there's only 2 other abilities in the game, so I guess that's not a big statement. But there's nothing else in the game that lets you move as fast as this ability does, and not get hit by enemies, so there had to be some danger to using it. To sort of add that in, if you fall out of time while you're flying, so you can kind of see when the player falls out of time. Normally, it's when they fall out of sync with the music, or they don't put their inputs in the proper time intervals, then the character will move really, really slow, and you see this a lot of the time when the character's moving in the game. With the bird, if you're flying and you fall out of time, you're going to fall to the ground and take a hard point of damage. I like this mechanically because it offsets the movement and the speed from the bird and causes you to be a little more cautious with flying. And later on in the game, if I want to add like a chasm that you can fly over, it'll make it really dangerous to fly over that chasm because if you fall out of time, you'll fall down the chasm and it'll add a sort of a stress element to it, if that makes any sense. And because it's a lot more interesting to go over the chasm with the risk of failure than it is to just be guaranteed to fly over the chasm. The problem with this right now is that there's not a good indication that you've fallen other than the damage. So it just goes straight back to the idle animation, and then there's no indication that you fell at all. There's not like a damage animation. There's not a fall animation. So what I need to do is I need to go in at almost like just one frame would go a long, long ways towards improving the state, and maybe some particles that like smash upwards into the ground when you fall down, just so the player knows, oh, I fell from the sky. It probably hurt the bird. And maybe I could even use the particle effect that the player like that moves with the player when they move around, except I can have it going from the sky downwards. I don't know. Stuff for the future. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, this was a really light week, much to my frustration. I would have very much preferred to get more done, but that's all right. Design for the projectile. Like I said, I'm not really sure what I want that projectile to do necessarily. I considered maybe that the feather would somehow was like magical and would push other enemies into the air, so that way you could like separate enemies. So you could say this enemy's going to be flying in the air, then I'm going to fly and hit him with a feather, as well I'm ignoring the other enemies in the ground. Something to that regard. I don't know how I feel about this yet. Again, this is something that I really need to play test to figure out if it's going to be something that I want to do. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. Next week, I'm going to be, of course, finishing up with the bird avatar, getting all the abilities working together, and as always, if I get time, moving on to the statue enemy. There's a lot to be done with these avatars, though, before I can move on to the statue enemy, because I have to finish the avatars. Obviously, I have to change the. That'll be simple. I have to change the statue. It's still a rabbit. It should not be a rabbit, but and then I have to change the system for the player updating their avatar because right now there's yes there are two avatars, but the only way to change between them is for you to manually go into code and say you're using this avatar now, you're using this avatar now. I don't think it'll be very hard to implement that, but with this type of thing, you can never really be too sure how easy it's going to be to do something ahead of time or before, because a simple project could end up turning into this multifaceted, complicated thing that you end up doing later down the line. Oh, one more thing before I go. I also added a generalized projectile class for the push projectile because the dust cloud is actually a projectile under the hood. So there's a generalized projectile class and generalized push projectile class, so I can get that behavior in other places now. And I'm going to use that same projectile class for the feather that the bird shoots. That way I don't have to do a lot of the same work again. Even if it is a little minor thing, it's going to help speed up the game development future down the road. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. I'll see you next week.